No DNA, no computers, no forensics labs like today. Yet detectives in the 1920s could stare at a bloodstain or a single hair and somehow find a killer. Long before the age of DNA databases and digital fingerprints, investigators faced a terrifying reality. Every crime scene was a puzzle with missing pieces. They had no genetic code to test, no modern lab machines humming in the background. And yet, they solved murders, caught thieves, exposed liars. The question is, how? Today, we'll step back into the 1920s, a decade of smoke-filled police offices, primitive labs, and minds determined to pull truth from dust. We'll uncover how early forensic pioneers, men like Edmond Locard, Carl Landsteiner, and the first FBI scientists, used science, intuition, and a touch of obsession to hunt killers without DNA. This isn't just history. It's the birth of modern forensics, forged in an era of uncertainty and fear. Before DNA existed, crime solving was more art than science. Detectives relied on witness accounts, confessions, or sheer luck. Crime scenes were often contaminated, officers trampling through evidence with muddy boots, or crowds gathering to stare at the body. But around the 1910s and 1920s, a quiet revolution began. The idea that science could uncover truth started taking root. In France, a criminologist named Edmond Locard, often called the Sherlock Holmes of Lyon, built one of the first police laboratories in 1910. Locard believed in something revolutionary, the exchange principle. He wrote, "Every contact leaves a trace. If a suspect touched a doorknob, a victim, or a weapon, part of them stayed behind. Dust, hair, fibers, invisible, but powerful." It sounds obvious now, but in the 1920s, this idea was radical. Locard's lab analyzed cigarette ash, fingerprints, fabric threads, even soil under a suspect's shoe. It was science in its infancy, but it worked. The fingerprint became the first forensic signature of identity. Unlike faces, fingerprints don't age, and no two people share the same pattern. The science began in the late 1800s with Sir Francis Galton, but by the 1920s, it had become global police practice. The United States, Britain, and even colonial police forces across the world were cataloging fingerprints by the thousands. The FBI's fingerprint division, the forerunner of today's massive database, was founded in the 1920s under Edgar Hoover. Clerks worked day and night, filing index cards by ridge pattern, whorl, and loop. One of the earliest courtroom breakthroughs happened a decade earlier, the Thomas Jennings case in Chicago, 1911. A fingerprint left in wet paint was allegedly matched to Jennings, a burglary suspect. It became the first case in U.S. history where fingerprint evidence helped secure a conviction. The 1920s turned fingerprinting into a science of certainty. Investigators dusted with graphite powder, lifted prints with tape, and photographed them under bright lamps. It was slow, manual, prone to error. But for the first time, guilt could be seen, not just claimed. In 1901, Austrian scientist Carl Landsteiner discovered that human blood comes in types A, B, AB, and O. This single revelation transformed medicine and crime scenes. By the 1920s, investigators realized that blood wasn't all the same. A stain could be tested to show if it was human, and even what blood type it belonged to. This wasn't as precise as DNA, but it could exclude suspects. Imagine this, a 1924 crime scene. A knife stained with blood type B. If a suspect's blood type was O, the stain couldn't be his. It was simple logic. but revolutionary science. Blood typing entered courtrooms as forensic evidence, though often accompanied by long explanations to skeptical juries. It couldn't prove who did it, only who didn't. Still, it was a vital step, biology entering the courtroom. The 1920s saw forensic science become institutionalized. In France, Locard's Lion Lab inspired others across Europe. In the UK, Scotland Yard's Fingerprint Bureau expanded. In the United States, the Bureau of Investigation, later the FBI, established its own technical laboratory. These early labs were dimly lit rooms filled with microscopes, chemicals, and meticulous notebooks. They examined bullet casings, handwriting, shoe prints, hair fibers, anything that could speak for the dead. One case in Lyon involved a murder weapon wrapped in a fragment of newspaper. Locard compared dust particles on the paper to those on the suspect's shoes. Both contained the same coal residue, unique to one local factory. It wasn't DNA, but it was proof enough. The message was clear: science could catch killers. And police forces around the world took notice. Locard's principle didn't just change how investigators looked at evidence. It changed how they thought. Every fiber, every flake of paint, every speck of soil became a potential witness. Criminals began to realize that invisibility was a myth. Even if they left no fingerprints, the dust on their shoes, the hair on their coat, or the pollen in their car could betray them. A case from early 1920s Europe showed this power vividly. Investigators found glittering metal dust on a suspect's cuff. Analysis revealed it matched the same type used in the victim's workshop. That tiny trace, invisible to the eye, became the link that solved the murder. Before DNA, trace evidence was the ghost print of guilt. Every contact left a story, if you knew how to read it. The 1920s also saw the rise of forensic ballistics, the science of matching bullets to guns. Calvin Goddard, an American Army doctor and scientist, revolutionized this field. He created the comparison microscope, which allowed examiners to look at a bullet from a crime scene and one fired from a suspect's gun side by side. Tiny grooves, known as rifling marks, could reveal if a bullet came from that exact weapon. For the first time, murder weapons could speak in a court of law. This method was famously used in the controversial Sacco and Vanzetti case of 1927, where ballistics testimony played a key role. Whether the test was accurate or not remains debated, but the idea of bullet fingerprinting changed investigations forever. Not all evidence came from blood or bullets. In the 1920s, handwriting analysis became an investigative art. For ransom notes, forged checks, or threatening letters, experts compared slants, loops, and pressure points. It was subjective, but surprisingly persuasive in court. As typewriters became common, investigators learned to match documents by tiny mechanical flaws, a chipped letter E, a misaligned R. These imperfections acted like fingerprints for machines. One infamous forgery case in 1928 was solved when a single misprinted letter on a typewriter matched documents found at a suspect's home. Mechanical error became human proof. Photography became the detective's second pair of eyes. By the 1920s, police photographers captured crime scenes meticulously: angles, distances, body positions. These photos served as permanent memory for juries and scientists. But the real innovation came with reconstruction. Investigators began recreating crimes using mannequins, string diagrams, and staged photos. They could test theories: how blood spattered, how bullets traveled, how victims fell. In an era before computers, this was analog forensics, part science, part art, part obsession. For every case solved, another went wrong. The 1920s forensic toolkit was powerful, but fallible. Fingerprints were sometimes smudged or misread. Blood tests gave false positives. Ballistics experts disagreed under pressure. And judges, dazzled by science, often trusted flawed testimony. Some innocent people were likely convicted because early forensic methods lacked today's rigor. Records from the era show cases later overturned when evidence didn't hold up to modern standards. The 1920s investigators walked a fine line between discovery and guesswork. They built the foundation of forensic science, but at a human cost. Behind every great discovery stood obsession. Locard himself spent days alone in his lab, inhaling fumes from chemicals as he dusted for particles invisible to anyone else. Forensic scientists often worked without recognition, driven by an almost morbid fascination, the idea that the dead could speak. But there was danger in their confidence. Science became a weapon as much as a tool, one that could be used to prove guilt, even when guilt was uncertain. The forensic age promised truth, but it also demanded faith. In the U.S., the 1920s marked the transformation of the Bureau of Investigation. Under J. Edgar Hoover, the Bureau became obsessed with professionalism in science. Fingerprint files, handwriting experts, chemical testing, all centralized in Washington, D.C. By 1932, Hoover officially opened the FBI laboratory, a direct descendant of 1920s experimentation. It began with a single room, a few microscopes, and one scientist. But it grew into one of the most powerful forensic institutions in the world. Without the groundwork of those 1920s pioneers, the lab would never have existed. Let's walk through what a 1920s investigator actually did when arriving at a scene, without DNA, without modern tech. Step 1. Observe the environment. They'd sketch the scene, photograph the body, and mark evidence with chalk or string. Step 2. Identify physical evidence. Blood stains, footprints, cigarette butts, broken glass, anything physical became data. Step 3. Collect trace material. Small tweezers lifted hair strands or fibers. Samples were sealed in envelopes, often by hand. Step 4. Laboratory analysis. They'd test for human blood using chemical reagents like Kasselmeyer. Fingerprint cards were compared manually under magnifying lenses. Soil was examined under microscopes for mineral content. Step 5. The deduction. The detective, armed with these fragments, would reconstruct what might have happened, often guided by instinct as much as science. This method wasn't foolproof, but it laid the blueprint for modern crime scene processing. Case 1. The Chicago Fingerprint Murder, 1911. Thomas Jennings' case proved fingerprinting could stand in court. The idea spread like wildfire. Case 2. The Lion's Dust Murder, France. Locard matched coal dust on shoes to the factory where a body was found, one of the earliest examples of trace evidence solving a crime. Case 3. The Sacco and Vanzetti Trial, 1927. Forensic ballistics took center stage. Though the case remains controversial, it pushed bullet comparison into global headlines. These moments, flawed yet groundbreaking, marked the birth of forensic faith. By the time DNA profiling arrived in the 1980s, investigators stood on the shoulders of those early pioneers. Their microscopes became mass spectrometers. Their notebooks became databases. Their fragile logic became molecular proof. But the principle remained the same. Every contact leaves a trace. Every murderer, every thief, every act of violence, leaves behind a whisper waiting to be heard. The 1920s investigators listened to that whisper, long before anyone knew what DNA was. They taught us that science doesn't just prove guilt, it gives the voiceless a way to speak. Science has come a long way since then, but the 1920s investigators remind us of something timeless. Truth doesn't always need high tech, sometimes it just needs eyes willing to see what others overlook. If the thought of solving murder without DNA gives you chills, comment trace of truth below, and subscribe to Hunting Cold Cases, where every mystery leaves its mark.